Today, I want to talk about a few ways to get yourself back to working on your comic if you are having a hard time doing that right now. Maybe you're in some sort of creative block. Maybe you've got the winter blues and things are just a little difficult in general right now. So sometimes we need extra motivation to get ourselves really excited about working again. And I specifically don't want to talk about some of the really, typical conventional approaches to this. They can work great. Like sometimes you need a rest. Sometimes you need to go and reread some of your favorite books or find ways to inspire yourself. Sometimes you've done too much of that already and you need, something else to really just get you back to the table, put the pencil or, iPad pencil in your hand and just set you off to the races. So my first tip is to make a jury list. This is something I've only ever heard of from one source. I was at a writer's conference and this was about a decade ago, so forgive me if I don't remember the original attribution for this idea. But there was a speaker who mentioned that every time he sets out to work on a new novel, he creates what he calls a jury list of people who the novel is for. And they're essentially the only people that, in his mind, he'll allow to be the judges of whether the project is a success. So these can be people who are living, dead, or fictional, and it's something you never have to share with someone else. So I do this for each one of my books. And you're coming up with 12 names, just like a jury in a court. And it's strangely comforting. I know that it's phrased kind of as they'll be the judges of your work, but the sentiment is kind of the opposite of that to me. It's saying this doesn't have to be for everyone, but I think this story is for these people. And it has such a potential to touch the hearts of these kinds of people. So sometimes it'll be family members or friends. Sometimes it'll be my favorite authors who I feel like inspired the writing or whose voices are just, aspirational for the kind of project this is. Sometimes it'll be figures in history. And I also just like putting characters on there. It's honestly okay too if you put a character's name on the list who's in the story that you're writing, because I think in a sense the characters can become representative of actual people in our lives or, out there in the world. So, someone like your main character might be the person who needs to read the book. And so putting them on the list helps remember that there are people out there who could be inspired by the effort you're putting into telling this story. So my second tip is to info dump. Just ramble to someone about your personal reasons for wanting to tell stories. I love an info dump. I love going to a friend when I'm stuck and just trying to verbally hash out what makes me love to write and draw and why I love making comics and why this story is important to me. You can also, when you maybe have talked it out with someone or journaled about it, if that's better for you, you can write down these reasons and put them on the wall near where you draw. I remember for my first graphic novel, when I got stuck, I wrote on an index card, do it out of love, something like that. And I put it on the wall because for me, when I'm really stuck, I think that remembering the people that the story could help, especially because I write children's comics, thinking of kid readers who might be in a similar situation to the protagonist is very inspiring to me. But your reasons for wanting to tell stories can be anything. My best friend and critique partner writes stories because she wants to write the kind of stories that she wants to read in an immediate sense. So she feels like if she writes novels, they will be the kinds of stories that are the most perfectly designed for her that any story in the world could be. And I've seen that sentiment echoed by other writers and authors and illustrators. That's a completely valid way to go about it. And for a lot of us, it's just the thing that we love to do that makes us feel the most like ourselves, and that just is how we want to spend our days. So think about whatever writing means to you and say it out loud, and perhaps write it down as well if that'll help you remember. My third tip is to reread your own story. So I said I wasn't going to talk about, reading the books that inspire you, which is a pretty common art block tip. I want you to go and reread anything you have from the existing story that you're working on. I usually have a full synopsis of my comics before I even get started drawing them. Or if you're someone who kind of makes it up as you go, you can read whatever you have so far of your thumbnails or of your finished pages. And I would also really highly recommend going back and reading things that you've written in the past that have meant a lot to you. Every now and then I go back and look at like silly webcomics I've made, or I'll read bits of writing from some novel drafts that are sitting in a drawer. It helps me remember that they were so important to me in that moment of my life. And that writing and telling stories is such a beautiful way to capture these moments in time. I was wondering about this tip because I suppose there is a danger of going to these older works and just not being happy with them, right? And I wouldn't want that to be discouraging. Sometimes we look back at our old writing and it feels pretty cringe. But if you are cringing at something that you've made in the past, even that is an indication that you've grown and become a better writer or artist since then. So I think that's still a positive. It reflects how your taste is developing and how you will continue to tell cooler and cooler stories in a moment when maybe you are fearing that the next thing that you make isn't going to be very good. I don't think any of us have peaked yet, and I think we will continue to tell fantastic stories throughout our lives and careers. My fourth tip is asking for support. For me, this often comes in the form of body doubling, which is a pretty common piece of advice that you'll hear in productivity videos. It's really tricky with comics, I find, especially when I'm thumbnailing. It is hard to lean on other people because even just having someone in the room or on a call with me can feel distracting and kind of stunt my momentum. But if you're really, really stuck, body doubling with someone is great. At that point, do anything. Just try a bunch of stuff, see what sticks. I've recently even told friends, I am so stuck with this. I need you to reach out to me and ask me to body double whenever you have time. If you're in a place when you need that, try to let people in your orbit know that you need that so that they can offer support. If there are other ways that you can try to, rely on people, do that too. Maybe you're somebody who is helped by showing your progress pages off to someone, or maybe you could join a critique group or somebody's Patreon critique tier so that you can have goals for okay, I need to get this many pages done by the time this critique group or stream or whatever rolls around so that I have something to show. Externalizing deadlines is hugely helpful. I have ADHD, so yeah, that's a big thing for me for sure, but I think that it works for a lot of people of many neurotypes. What works one day for productivity might not work on a different day. So staying on our feet and knowing when it's the right time to loop other people in to help us is fantastic. It's all good. We, can't do any of this alone. And then other people will know that when they have a time like that with their own art where they're stuck, they can come to us and ramble or ask for help or ask for body doubling. And that is great. Sometimes we also just need to complain, and that's okay too. Okay, and my last tip number 5 is a little bit strange, I'm going to admit. So it's something that I hope you'll approach with an open mind, because I think that it won't work for everyone, but the people that it works for could be helped a lot by it. We're getting into some like therapy, neuroplasticity silliness here. We're in special interest territory. Basically, what I would like you to do with this exercise is to consider who you were when this creative block started. Whatever reason you're having trouble like working on your comic or getting back to making art and telling stories probably has an origin. Like for me, it's something that I feel like really got started in like college or so, that I would hit this like specific kind of block where I open up a comic page and I'm telling myself I'm going to work on it, but then like I just stare at the page or I make little marks and I just feel so drained and tired. Like that's not something I faced as much as a kid. I'm sure I still had periods of time where I just wasn't as inspired to draw, but there's a specific kind of art block that I've dealt with in adulthood that's got its own flavor to it. So recently I did this exercise where I put a hand on my heart and sat up straight, and I just let myself think about the kind of person that I was when I started experiencing art block in this way. And then as I thought about it, I also tried to imagine the kind of person that I needed during that time in my life. And honestly, I've met people since then who have, filled those roles and been wonderful. But at the time, I didn't have that, and I'm still perhaps carrying some of that with me. So essentially, the point of this is to try to tell yourself the thing that you needed to hear back then while you're actively thinking about that time in your life. And maybe it won't really do it for you, or maybe it'll be cathartic and give you some revelations. So it's just something to try. I had a really wonderful experience doing this because I realized that the thing I needed to hear back then is almost like the theme of the book I'm working on now. I just hadn't really connected it in my head to something that I actively like needed to tell myself or my past self in order to move past some things. I'm hoping it'll help you deal with your art block, but even if it doesn't, maybe it'll give you some fodder for the kinds of stories that you could be passionate about writing next. So if you're dealing with creative block right now or having a hard time making your comics, I feel you. I hope it gets better soon. We all go through it at some point, and it can be really tough feeling like you're the kind of person who can't do this, especially when we go into comics because we're passionate about it and because it means so much to us, right? So it can hurt more to be unable to approach the things that we really love than it would otherwise if we were having a block about something that we didn't really care about. So take it to heart that having a hard time with it, like struggling this much, is probably a sign that this is something that means a lot to you. And do what you can. Be persistent and active about trying to crack this nut whenever you have the energy. Like if you have rested, if you have, done all the general self-care things and they're not working, that's when I think it's time to be, I wanted to say aggressive, but that's not exactly the word. Just proactive, I suppose, fierce about trying to beat art block. Yeah, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.